Hello, everyone. Sorry for the little stutter start there. Uh, just a little bit of stuff with the Zoom platform, but here we are. You should be seeing a screen share from me yep, that looks like that is working, of the title screen for our webinar today, OpenTelemetry's Hidden Superpowers, the OTel Collector. And it is April 8th, so therefore we are here on the right time and place. I would love to hear the answer to two questions for everybody in the chat. Here are the questions for the chat. They are, and let me make sure that everybody's able to. I believe everybody should be able to go ahead and send to the chat. Otherwise, go ahead and use the Q&A function. Um, and my two questions I'd love to have answered is, are you already using OpenTelemetry to monitor your services? And if you're using OpenTelemetry, are you using the collector? So do let me know the answers to those. And or no, if you're still online, if you could make sure that the chat is set to allow attendees to add to the chat. Either way, do let us know. And then we'll get started with some introductions here. Thank you so much for the first person to answer. It looks like you will use the Q&A function for right now. Appreciate it. Oh, yes, there we go. Chat's coming in. Love it. Yeah, okay, so we got OTel users and OTel Collector users. So if that is not you, oh yeah, Grafana as the corrector, that's great. Okay, that's fantastic. I love that. That means we get to skip a little bit of the what on earth is OpenTelemetry stuff. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'm Nočnica Mellifera. You might know me from my writing on the news stack. You might know me as Serverless Mom on Twitter or from the CNCF Slack. I've spoken at a number of CNCF events about the collector and about these other components before. And yeah, it's great to be joining you. And with me now, finally we get a participation here.
Hi everyone, this is María. I'm one of the product managers here at Checkly. I've been in developer tools ecosystem for more than 10 years and right now driving our observability and playwright-based initiatives, which is very exciting to me. And yeah.
I love that. And looks like everybody's answering that they're already using the collector, which is fantastic. If that's not you, please put a hand up because I want to make sure if we have some exceptions to that rule. But otherwise, I will link to a couple of pieces of documentation in the follow-up where you can read that and follow up. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is our plan for today. OpenTelemetry intro, which we're mainly going to lie because it looks like OpenTelemetry intro not necessary. Why we might need filtering. We're going to talk about configuring the collector with its normal pipelines and performing filtering. We'll talk about some notes and gotchas. We'll talk about transfer functions and the language OTTL. We'll do an actual demo of that. We won't just talk about it in theory. We'll actually see it working. And then what you can't do with collector processors, and the collector can run almost anywhere, which maybe some of you know, but let's talk about statelessness and what that implies about your configuration options. And thank you so much again for answering our questions for the chat. That was really appreciated. That gives us a really good level set. Okay, let's dive right into it. So we're taking a look at an example application. So this application is actually running in the background here. If we want to check it out, here's the bare version of it where we rolls an array of dice. We do notice it's running pretty slowly. So we have a desire for some observability in here that it takes it like 8-9 seconds to return an array. So that doesn't seem right. And as our humble developer was writing this, they, for really good reason, sent around the both user ID and user database key as values in that process.
And of course, in this case, you're doing it very, very explicitly, but you can see this through environment variables and through authentication processes often enough, in which there are legit reasons for you to have, like a fake user ID or a real one that you're testing things against and authenticating. And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the thing is, do you want that in your spans and traces?
Right. Right. So for the developers, it was probably a good day that it was like, great, I got the database key to propagate correctly, right? I'm getting it from this other service. The problem is then when we go in to, for example, our checkly dashboard and we're looking at this trace, we're seeing that their database key is getting sent through here. It's all the way here at the bottom right. And that is maybe a little far for that to go. Now, for reasons that we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation, it's actually the least likely place this is going to show up is Checkly, because Checkly shouldn't be grabbing real user data generally as a trace, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But for now, let's just say that for any place we might be viewing a trace, we can look at our Jaeger dashboard as well. We'll see, oh no, we're getting these database keys as part of the response. So, what can we do about this? Now, let's talk about sort of where this leads us, or the conclusions that this draws us to. Why we might need filtering, right? OpenTelemetry instrumentation, like any code level instrumentation, lets you send a lot of data rather easily. In this case, I think I may be doing a manual span here, but this will get picked up by auto instrumentation. Some of that data is noisy, some of it is sensitive, some of it is good but needs little tweaking, right? Maybe we're sending this with a camel case and we want it in snake case or that kind of thing. When faced with a data collection problem, it would be ideal if we could solve it without having to commit any code changes. So this is kind of critical. I think all of us who have worked in operations and observability know this, that this may be, oh no, we're leaking data, we're concerned, but just as Maria said, it's probably a good thing that this thing is propagating around our application. There's 100 other times where what we're seeing in the observability dashboard, we don't want our solution to fix it to be, let's go commit some code changes, right? Oh, let's go in and edit this code. That's not great. It's not even that fun for myself when I just kind of work to have to write as like, here's the explanation on a PR. Oh, we're doing this to fix a trace somewhere in a dashboard, right? Not exactly ideal. So we'd like to improve on that process.
Yeah, I think it's especially relevant if you think about it, of all of the things that you might even unconsciously leak through. And once you notice, how can you quickly fix and address this, right?
Yeah. And another reason why we might really want filtering here is because sure, even if we can go ahead and commit to this code, which is an ideal workflow, we might say, okay, but how do we know it's not happening anyplace else, right? And that is something where we really want to have a more complete solution, and the OpenTelemetry Collector absolutely makes that available. So let's talk about the configuration of the collector. For those of you who run the collector, you've had to do some interaction with this already, right? Where you set where data is going. In fact, I'm not going to introduce the basic idea, though I really love that this is what happens to be in the collector OTel demo collectors config right now
Oh yeah,
is
in
that
ours, yeah. Like we have the OTel demo running for all of the examples that we're doing internally, and this is the config that we're actively using right now.
yeah, and this
So
is I would say like this is also what's in the stock hotel demo right now. Yeah, you're right. This is running in ours, but yeah, like also the stock one also has some of this default config set. In fact, it
mhm.
has these two set. So what we're looking at here, we're looking at a processor. It's doing its basic like memory limitation and batching with the default batching, but then it's got this trace statement and it's saying, hey, we want to ignore certain spans or we want to alter the names of certain spans. And here we are, right in the like core OTel demo. There's this great moment of where it's saying, hey, we're doing this again. A code change is what we'd like eventually, right? We'd like to fix this existing issue with Next.js, but for now, let's just go ahead and do this pattern change. So, very general, and again, we should feel pretty confident about this already, right? We have these pipelines within collectors of receivers, processors, and exporters. One of the things, even for those using the collector, that I want to point out, we don't flag it up that much in this webinar, is how powerful that receiver's end is. That doing something like, even just I've seen like, oh, I'm querying from a SQL database, doing some transformation with processors, and then sending out to a NoSQL database to create the appropriate page files for whatever it is I need. That's something that's completely doable with receivers, right? We might be able to skip having to stand up a worker that's querying data, but of course, mainly is this kind of thing where it's translating between these data sources. And then processors, which is where a lot of the money happens, right? Where we say when we do data scrubbing, data normalization, batching, and sampling is going to happen here. And then obviously we have our exporters at the end, and you can see those right listed out into pipelines. So one of the other things to keep in mind is we can have a forked pipeline, right? We can have something going out to multiple places. And one of the things we do for checkly traces is that we say we want just a little bit, we want only the relevant open telemetry chases, those that were kicked off by our own synthetic monitor. And so this is a very, very powerful tool for us.
Yes, indeed. That's basically the filtering that we're recommending everyone to use, right? So that the checkly header that we're using to connect things is the one that they filter for, or that they sample for, so that we only get the checkly related traces and not all of the other things about real users that you don't care about so much in this case.
So
Uh,
at a basic level, that filtering is right. We can do things like filtering by attribute, where we just said, hey, let's go ahead and drop these spans. That's not exactly what I'd like here. Now let's take a look back at our example where we have this database key that's coming in. Now, I want to just take our scenario a little bit further where we're saying, okay, do we just want to drop this attribute or not propagate it? Well, it turns out that we really like having this tail of the attribute. We really like knowing if they're in the UK database or not. So we really don't want to just drop an attribute or drop spans with an attribute. We'd like to modify this. So this initial just filtering based on attribute where we're saying go ahead and drop that span, not perfect for us. So we want to go a little bit further than that. Okay, questions about sort of what our mission is, what our little demo is, and what we're kind of expecting to happen. Go ahead and drop those in the Q&A while we dive into actually fixing this. So I'll just load up my Jaeger dashboard here and take a look for a dropped span. So this is a span that, let me get this. Oh, we must have had something change about the load, the traffic generator. Sorry about that. I'm gonna go ahead and show a screenshot of this. This is a drop span. This is an example from another dashboard, from a Signos dashboard. But in this case, right, we filtered by this attribute, and the trace is still sent. The parent and child relationships stay the same, but instead of showing that span, right, if it had, for example, this the user was set to be Bob, that entire span was dropped, so we just show a missing span here.
Yeah, I think people might be familiar with it. Like sometimes when you have a service that is not properly instrumented, you can see that in your chain of events. It's the same effect as dropping one span completely, right? But in this case, it won't be connected to all of the spans generated by a specific service, but rather the ones that you're telling it, hey, this one, just don't pass it through.
Right, and we can see right relationships like that here where we have right we were expecting to have a lot of these like parent child relationships, but there are times when we have the child spans, we don't have the parent span, so we'll see missing span listed in there.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of notes in general on filtering with some like known gotchas about this. So once a span is hit an attribute that will filter later, conditions won't be checked. And this I believe, right, you will miss if you have like invalid code, right, in a filter until something finally gets through those earlier filters. Conditions are chained as or, so any matching condition causes filtering. If all span events for a span are dropped, the span will still appear in the trace. So remember that events are just attributes, another type of attributes on that span. I may not be generating any here in my demo app, but removing all of the
Well,
events
I think
does.
the FS stat has an event, right? Because it had an issue.
Oh, right, yeah, it has
There you go.
because
Yeah.
it's trying to do FS stat on my laptop in its demo container, so it's like I'm not happy about that.
It's like I'm not
Um,
gonna, yeah.
so we could drop these, but even so, we would still get this span set through, right? And so the span remains even when there is no event attached to it.
Yeah,
Yes.
which makes sense that you might even drop more information about them, right, as you're filtering or tweaking it a bit. And it will have less details, but it will still exist, right? Because the span has its own entity that then has things associated to, if we say it very simply.
And if we take a look at, I'm just going to bring in our own collector config here.
Mhm.
Um, Taking a look at some of the processors here, right? The issue, right, is what level we have our statements at, right? Is where we're going in and saying, hey, we want to just remove the span or we want to remove the entire trace, right? And so when we're removing events on a span, we're not removing the span, even if we remove all of the events.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Nika, do we have the config filtered? Like the one that, because I
Oh, this
think it
filter just to
was.
send checklist stuff.
Oh no, just like the one that you tweaked so that
Oh
the
yeah, no.
DB key is in there. Okay, we're getting
So
there.
yeah, we'll
Okay,
once we talk about
sorry.
OTTL, we'll get there. Yeah, it's actually
Okay,
there. It's commented out right now, but
I,
it will be running in a
I,
sec.
okay, I got a bit ahead. Sorry, apologies,
No
everyone. I'm
worries.
very
But yeah, so
excited.
right now we're still sending. If we go and look actively at our traces, we're still sending this attribute on here on one of the spans. We're still getting this data that we do not want. We're getting this database key,
Okay,
so
yeah,
we're
we
gonna
we
fix
gotta
that
get rid of
live.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and feel free to drop any questions as we get into actually fixing that. So we have our problematic data like we just saw. So one thing to be aware of is you can process your data with a regex. There's some detail here. One of the things to think about in terms of using a straight regex is that you have hurt a little bit like the readability of that config. I think it's something we're all aware of, that if you have like implicit statements in that regex about what you're doing with replacing multiple components, the ability for another developer or even yourself in a few weeks to come back and read that and know exactly what it is that's changing about that value may be reduced a little bit. So let's go ahead and fix this one now. Therefore, this note will make sense. So let's go ahead and fix this now. Let's go ahead and open this config. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a replace pattern on this attribute. We're going to say, hey, if you have the user database key, so this is using the OpenTelemetry transform language, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so rather than just using like a single regex statement, we're able to be a little bit more explicit and say, hey, we want to go ahead and match by this pattern and replace as follows. So in my case, I want to actually flag up to the people looking at these traces that the ID was removed. So I'm actually having it replace a string of digits with, hey, there was this ID removed, and then go ahead and say, okay, put this matched group at the end. And so per that note, now that I've updated this config, I'll need to go in and actually restart this container. And that again is not a super onerous task. I'm sure anybody here who's gone through this has dealt with this already a number of times. But I only mention it because it is kind of critical for planning, that you don't want to set yourself up that it's very, very difficult to restart the collector.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just letting that restart, and then I'm gonna restart my local service, my little dice roller service here in just one moment. Okay, that's looking okay. And that's restarted. So some notes here about, oh, sorry about that. Some notes here about using regex in OTTL. I mentioned these. The other ones maybe are sort of from the community. A number of people have mentioned them, but these ones here I have hit all of in my attempts to use regex effectively. So the first, right, is that escapes need to be doubled, as you can see in my config. You can use capture groups and replace all patterns. And sorry, using
I was too
OTTL
fast for a
within the
second.
collector's configuration file, $sign must be escaped to bypass environment variable substitution logic. So to put in a literal $sign, you're going to need to use three signs, which did happen to me. So there you go. One moment while I get this service restarted with the right port number.
Yeah, honestly, and this is a great time for questions because live debugging or live fixing takes a bit of time. So yeah, if you have any questions so far on, or I don't know, maybe some of you already used OTTL. To be honest, yeah, I've only seen it a couple times, and it's one of those things that you never need or are aware of. Like you're happy with just regular regex, and then suddenly one day it's like, oh wait, I want to do something more explicit that is very clear to the rest of the team, and then it's like, okay, I'll use it. But if not,
Yeah.
you may be completely agnostic to this language that you haven't needed ever. So yeah.
Yeah, so a little word around that using of OTTL, and feel free to drop questions in the chat about it, is that it really covers these kind of scenarios that go a little bit further than a simple filter, right? You can do a config based replace. You can do a config based replace with a regex, but then there's the stuff. I want to drop all IDs that are in the range of our demo accounts, but they don't match an exact regex. Now, I wrote that in here, and then I'm like, okay, I can, you can write a regex to match divisible by 7, right? So, of course you can in some way write a regex, but they'll have a user ID like X from an account ID like X. So there we go. We want to bridge these two values, and we don't want to futz around with like merging strings and writing a regex on a merged string. We just want to do something a little more straightforward. For my demo accounts, I'd like to transform the user IDs on their traces from number ID to number underscore demo underscore ID. Or two different teams used camel and snake case, and I'd like to normalize their metric names. These are all times where we are very likely to need something a little bit further than just a config, and that's where OTTL comes in. So OTTL is first proposed, introduced about 2.5 years ago. If somebody's more up on the CNCF and they want to correct my timeline, let me know. But it's about that time.
Mm-hmm.
We need to transform data. Config-based transformations have some implicit limitations, and OTTL is very tightly scoped and relatively quite easy to use. So this new data is sending. So let's go ahead and look at traces here. Well, this guy comes back with a 200, so we may service looks
Yeah,
available.
that one, yeah, failed. But we'll see.
Well, that looks good. Maybe it just timed out when I was requesting it.
Yeah,
But
maybe, yeah, it took too
the
much
health of the
time.
service is an interesting question, but I will say that now we do have that ID nicely removed and has a nice readable for our users response back, right? That when they're seeing this, they're not confused, but it's not just saying UK, right? It's giving a very clear message back about what's changed. I believe that the reason this guy times out is that what the reason I set up this app initially was to like test what's going on and get some of the useful information in a background trace. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. because it can time out, because anytime you request something too long, it comes back very slowly. You can see that behavior here, where if you request like 7 dice rolls, it just comes right back immediately. But if you
Honestly,
request
the first time that you did it, it took quite some
right,
time.
but if you request 13, it's like it takes forever, right? So we'll
Hmm.
we'll figure out why that is shortly. Okay, so let's go ahead and go a little bit further. Do feel free to drop any OpenTelemetry transform language questions in the chat. OTTL is pretty well documented. I have written a documentation page on it for our Learn site, for the Checkly Learn site, which is some of the better documentation of it. A lot of the OTTL stuff is in just video talks. It's relatively new and not super widely used yet, so that's the deal. I would definitely recommend using it to solve a problem. Don't worry about learning every single function of it.
Well, that's the way you always learn new languages,
Should.
right?
Well, I suppose this is my advice for life, right?
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do when you're learning pottery and this, right? But
Mm.
examples of stuff that would be like quite hard to do with any other kind of transform without OTTL
Mm.
is like flatten. And again, I do know you can flatten just with a straight regex. Not fun though, right? So it's very nice to be able to just hit a call there and say, okay, I want to flatten this.
Yeah, especially
And
because then the information that you want to access, you want to be able to see it in a flat and not in a tree list, because otherwise the levels of depth can go way too deep. So yeah.
and then all of the supported functions are covered right here. And I think when you, it's not just this, I promise, there's a documentation page at the bottom of this. There's a really nice explanation. And I think once you start to look at what they are, you start to see like, oh, okay, like I see why you would be very happy to have these functions available, like limit and keep keys, flatten, right, or all things. So it's like, oh, that's very nice that that's available. And yeah, here's that the slideware version of that, but we did it live, which is so nice. So what can't you do with collector processors? A lot. You can't connect spans to a trace with a processor, nor can you create a parent-child relationship. There's a number of reasons for that. If you're already implemented, you're probably safe on this one, but I have seen where people are diving into an implementation, reporting a lot of spans in a very manual way, and then trying to tie them together post hoc. And while that's possible, of course, on your data store, it's your data store. You can do what you want with it. It's tough, right? You'll be a lot happier if you're just correctly doing like context propagation, or correctly, but just doing your best at
Well,
context propagation.
that's what OTel is all about, right? Like context
Mm.
propagation needs to be there, pass through, and that way, that's what the processor is receiving and processing. Like it's not patching or amending the spans themselves or the yeah the I guess the connections between them, right? Like you can think of it as a chain of events that needs to be already linked through a parent and children relationship. Okay, so I belong here, I belong here, I belong here, and forcing that through the processor is yeah, it's not what OTel I guess is about right now with all of the context. Okay, so
So
let's see.
Javier asks a great question, which I'm going to read out just in case somebody's just watching the video. So we are using OTTL to define various tasks. Fantastic! I'm really glad you're doing it. I was like, oh, the next thing you should do is chained collectors, Javier, and then you mentioned that you're doing that, but we are using OTTL to define various struggling to define is ensuring that an attribute at the span or resource level in traces is within a specific set of values, especially when the attribute is inside an array. Our setup is complex, involving chained collectors. Yeah, so this is the slide for the rest of us about chained collectors. And we want to enforce that a particular user attribute is always within a predefined list of valid values. For example, we want to drop traces if the attribute is not in user 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you do you know if that's possible? So, um, one of the challenges you're facing here is the statelessness of the collector, right? That it's not pre-configured to say, "Hey, I'm going to go look over time and see, hey, what is this value is changing. We'll talk more about chain collectors in general in just a minute, but that one of the reasons, right, is to allow the collector to run almost anywhere, right? Statelessness is largely enforced. Now, there's nothing stopping you from making like a collector plugin that enforces state, right? That says, hey, go hit this database for a list of acceptable values. I guess, Javier, I want to make sure that I've got this right. Is your list of acceptable values, is it something that you could commit as part of a config file, or is the problem like, no, I want to go check this list of like, here's the acceptable values for this user. So like, does it fit inside a like config statement in the configurations file? Um, so given this situation that it does, you might want to make um uh or I think you can reverse those statements. I think you can say, yeah, you can, right? You can, we do this with our own checklist stuff where we say it requires that you have this header. And I think you can chain those, but I will need to check after this webinar. I think you can chain those and say, hey, eliminate everything that doesn't have this value or this value or this value. And you could chain them like that. And you could use that to
Yeah,
generate
but
a
I think
config
if the
file.
problem is that it's inside the attributes, right? So it's
Yes.
not there. Probably you do need the flattening that Nika was talking about earlier, so that you can see those attributes on a higher level that you can filter by.
Yeah.
So
If you
then you can
are,
do the ORs on top of the flattening.
yeah.
The,
Now, if you are, oh, there's Latin. Um, it'll take a map and it'll move it, right? Um, you can set a limit on flattening. The question is like if it's going to appear at an unknown depth, I think you should be able to flatten it. I would so the long answer, Javier, is I will want to check a couple of things to respond because I haven't dealt with this exact issue. Flatten will help a little bit, but I don't know. Oh no, it'll do occupants.1.0, and so then you can say, is this among? But your key values are going to shift. Ooh, this is such an interesting problem. Yeah. Javier, I'll get your info from Zoom and I'll send you a follow up on that. That's a really interesting one. Definitely solvable with OTTL, but yeah, I don't have a code snippet for it. Yeah, and
well,
so
of
that's
course, you coming in with it live will be
oh boy,
top
that would be so good,
genius.
wouldn't it?
It would be top genius. But I
um,
think yeah, giving a hint and then following up is good. Like I wouldn't also be comfortable recommending something that we haven't tested or validated that
right.
works. So
Well, and because the big issue is going to be flatten. If you have an arbitrary depth within an array like this, flatten is going to turn them out with individual keys. And so the thing I would want to test and also test is performant is like, can you just go through and say, hey, I want to see that this is among the attributes and not the keys? Because
right.
keep keys is part of it. But yeah, I think it's okay. So talking about chained collectors. So um one of the really good reasons to be connecting one collector to another is an example like here where we have a bunch of edge services running and we really are stressed about latency for anything that they do, even if it's just a simple put, right, to say, oh, I want to send my metrics off to the collector. And so in that case we run a collector that's much closer to those services and then have it feed into one more centralized collector. Pretty standard, right? When we first implement that, we have like a single collector, maybe we have some geo distribution, and that's it. But this kind of chaining is totally allowable and encouraged, and it'll make problems like Javier's a little bit easier because you can deploy config selectively to those collectors. So like let's say, yes, from these edge services, we only care about certain users. We can just deploy the config to just this collector. Or if we say, hey, no, we want to do this filtering far and wide. So for example, we want to strip out PII, we want to strip out anything that looks like an authentication key, then we could do that on collector C. We could say everything's passing through this collector. In this version, this OpenTelemetry Collector B is optional, right? It's we could just have some services report directly to that central collector. Why wouldn't we do that? It may be that that is that's doing some filtering and improving our performance.
Yeah, in some cases it's all about what your
And so that's
services
this
and
important.
applications
Oh, sorry, you were
need.
speaking and it lagged, so please go ahead.
My apologies. Maybe the internet. No, I was just gonna say that you may want this for different scenarios, right? Like one will be, of course, the filtering that you want to do ahead, and if that filtering will be resource intense heavy for OpenTelemetry Collector C in this example, you split it up and you're actually saving on costs and saving on restarts. So then when you need to do the tweaks, you don't need to do it into a huge thing that takes a lot of time, but into the tiny collector containers that you have deployed. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And this also it can be helpful for managing the like collector restart stuff. That's, hopefully you are running your collectors in some kind of container that's pretty easy to restart, but it's just something to be aware of that could be helpful for that. Also, obviously, is you have like a really big team and you have a bunch of decomposition of responsibilities that you may have multiple teams each responsible for those collectors. Something like giving the dev team their own collector, like, hey, go ahead and send your stuff here for this group, and then you can filter there, and then I can do sort of top level filtering as the final report. So, very generally, statelessness on the collector is the limitation of a lot of these things. It infected the scenario we got earlier, right? It's required for a high performance collector, right? There's absolutely no way to say I'm collecting data about the last hour, the last month, right? And also have something that can run all the way down to just in like a function as a service container, which is something the collector can do. So a lot of the basic limitations to what we can do for transforms is based on that. So questions like most frequent span this hour, don't send a trace that you sent 100 times already today, and then connecting spans into traces. That's why that's a limitation by default. Um, there may be kind of ways around that, but yeah, there are at the data store level, but on the collector level, they're not because of this statelessness. Um,
Mhm.
this also gets us into the concept of like head and tail based sampling, that the collector is not on its own a complete solution to like, hey, I want to only keep the data that looks really interesting because it's only dealing with what it's dealing with in that batch. So you can do, hey, I only want to send stuff over this length, or but you it is gonna be stateless between those runs.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Like you're batching, and within that batch it is the filtering that you can do, but other than that, it's not because how to say this nicely, like you want to batch as shortly as possible to be able to detect the issues, right? So if you want to do a transformation that goes over the last hour, but you're batching every 5 minutes, that's not gonna roll.
Yes, in fact, actually, that affected. You saw that I kind of took a pause between updating our config and going and looking at this fixed in
Mm-hmm.
this trace. And
Yeah.
that the batching affects that, right? Where in my case this is more about like live development during a webinar is affected. But if we think that we're detecting something based on what we're getting from an open telemetry collector, and of course at Checkly we're very focused on things like outages, downtime, the time you set for batching, it's nice to have big batches. That's useful for a lot of reasons, but it is going to affect how long it takes us to get feedback. And so it is something to be
W-
conscious of.
Yeah, we even have a limit on how far away can be the data from, right? Because checks are so critical to you sometimes every 10 seconds. And you need the data to be there, right? So even if OTel is async, you got to think about when are you going to need the data back to debug and resolve the problem. So if you're having an outage and your check just detected that, it's really key that you can see the traces when you need them right there. Not come here and say, well, I'll wait for the next batch of traces to come in.
So really great question from Linus. Can the collector collapse multiple related spans into a single span, i.e. a reduce operation? It sounds like no, since that would mean keeping state over time about the receive span. So the short version is between batches, definitely not. I do not think that there is any inbuilt function to do that, even just within a span. Like, hey, if you saw 7 spans all the same name, go ahead and move them to one span of a different length. And that gets me to I don't know that you can edit a span length at the collector level. I would have to check. But yeah, the short version is that, like, given statelessness, it's not going to be just a nice inbuilt function. You would be at the level of making your own collector plugin at that point.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
honestly, this is normally done in your own instrumentation where you do need
yeah.
to.
So two great places to do it. One is in your instrumentation. The other is in your data store, right? To say, hey,
Yeah.
if each of these spans is like this, like roll once function is happening a whole bunch of times, so we can actually take a look at that here. So this thing asks for the dice to be rolled 13 times, so each run of that roll is happening. So I can absolutely reach into the application code here and say, oh, let me go ahead and sorry, let me just drag this a little bit more readable. I can absolutely go in and say, hey, instead of starting a span here, go ahead and start it at the outside of this loop instead of starting it within this loop. By the way, to give away the ending here, the reason this thing is taking so long is because if you roll 11 or more dice, it tries to calculate pi to 30 digits, which really slows things down, it turns out. But that's funny in itself. But so that would be one solution, is at the instrumentation level, which again we're trying to avoid, right? So what do you do if you're saying, okay, I really don't want to do that now? I will say in this case, right, this is happening because someone's got in and manually put in that instrumentation on these spans. So it may not, it's not a super likely scenario that someone did that and you like really don't want it. Um, but so that would be a time when maybe on the data store side, it's time to crunch that down to say, hey, I want to go look at where we're storing data and I want to go turn all these spans into a single span. Um, so that would be like if you're doing like a ClickHouse data repository for your OpenTelemetry data. Okay, so back to our presentation. So yeah, now we're gonna transition to talking about sort of how we use a lot of these pipelines to enable our checkly traces, which is sending OpenTelemetry data to decorate our like synthetic proactive monitoring data. But before we do that, questions about our filtering functions or about editing spans and traces at the collector level. Really good one so far. Really nice advanced use cases.
Indeed. Those are always fun.
So one of the real effects of using the processors on the collector is being able to send data very, very efficiently. So, we all kind of know, and this is not meant as a specific call out. I know of the syndrome well from Splunk of hey, just send us everything, and on the data store side, we'll like figure it out. At Checkly, what Checkly does mainly is it takes an end-to-end test written in Playwright. It runs that end-to-end test on a cadence all the way from every minute to every day from multiple locations and shares those results with you. So we can take a look over here. Right now, I'm running multiple proactive tests against my site. I'm checking for accessibility issues on my site. I'm also going to the McDonald's menu site and checking if they started selling hot dogs. And I'll get a notification if they ever do. But until then, right, this test is failing. I have other tests, for example, looking at my application and just saying, hey, does it return 200? But there's some, pretty basic limitations to doing that. We get really good data about what's happening as if we're an expert user with their developer tools open about what's being sent back via the browser via the API. We can go in and see that data, but we'd like to see like what happened behind here, right? In my case, I have these traces for my status check, but it's failed a few times. there's been these failed runs. And from this perspective, I just have that it took a long time. In my report, it's, it took more than 10 seconds to come back. The page loaded, right? I even get a screenshot of the page loading, but it just took a little while for it to come back. The endpoint took a while to respond, and it generates an ngrok error. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to see further in there, and that is where OpenTelemetry can do a lot for us. So if we're observing these components with OpenTelemetry, we can just use the OTLP standard to send back information about what's happening in the background. And you can see in this result, if we scroll down here, that what we got from, I don't know why this one is not showing up. It should be connected. Let's go look over it on the traces view. Probably because something I just edited to make this more useful to us. We're able to see within Checkly that the thing that's taking so long is running an arctan function, which takes quite a little while, which again, you do need to calculate pi, but you shouldn't need to roll dice. So it should be an indicator of what we have. So we're able to see actually what functions are happening in the back end that are slowing us down.
Yeah, if you want, I can take over screen sharing and show
Oh
how
yeah,
we're
please go
actually
ahead.
doing this. Yeah, because
So I believe I can. Nope,
give me
that's not what I
permissions
want.
to do that. I think I can likely
Let's take a look here.
over.
So I do not have the ability to give you permission to screen share. I do not think.
But I have them.
Ah,
Look at that.
awesome.
Okay, so this is my internal dashboard. Of course, we ship dark mode on Friday. You probably noticed because if it's your default operating system choice, as it is mine, it will follow your lead. Okay, and yeah, we have the OTel demo that is the collector config that Nika was showing in the beginning, and you can see that it's one, the astronomy shop selling the best telescopes in the whole world. And against it, I have a group of checks that confirms that the checkout works, that the currency API is working, same for the data ads, the homepage loads fast and nice and steady, and that the products are there. And yeah, what you can see in every of the checks that I'm running to confirm that, of course, the checkout works in this case is that you can see even the smallest, of course, this has 100, not 100, but maybe 20 containers in it. And what you can see is that the things that errored or that failed in each one of these. And the way that we're doing this is that we're using the OTLP protocol to have it, right? To create the OpenTelemetry traces and to connect things out. And you can see this if you want to be very, very explicit, like, that what we're sending out to your system is the root span or the trace header. And then this is the chain that is propagating and telling everyone else, hey, if the parent is this one, it belongs to Checkly and send it over. And you can actually see it in the network call, like when we're sending things out on the request headers. Like there's a trace state in here that is Checkly true, and it passes also so if you're exporting data to, I don't know, Grafana, Tempo, or others, which you can do, you will see the Checkly the Checkly check runs statuses in your dashboards and the results in there. And this is the thing that we're exporting, and you can also send things in to connect those. And this is a trace parent that we're sending out, and that is connecting things out there. So my suspicion from your case, Nika, is that that trace parent wasn't properly connected for that check for experimental reasons on all of these things. But yeah, this is how it works and how we're using the protocol to make this work, right? And it's nice, steady, and of course reliable to connect your checks with the right traces, which can be many. And believe me if I tell you that this isn't, and probably in your cases either, this isn't the most complex span tree that I've seen. So yeah. And yeah, this is what I had.
I
We can go
love
back to
that.
Nika
I'm going to
and
grab
I'll
back
remove
share.
my screen. Yeah, go for it.
So this is our little animation of what's happening, right? Is the idea that Checkly will send out a check run. it hits your web app, and then you can send out that result. And obviously, like, the collector is totally necessary here. Again, most of you are using the collector, so won't belabor the point. But right, rather than having like multiple code points send it, right, we have everything sent into the collector, and then it's just set up to route to Checkly.
Mhm.
And we get this nice data as we just saw. And yes, you're by the way, I'm sure you're right that I was messing with the trace parent to try and break something for demonstration purposes, and then it like ended up disconnecting it from that run. Um, yes, all right. All this nice stuff where we see like, oh, it's going in and hitting Redis or hitting these other components, right?
Mhm.
So the idea, right, what Checkly's all about is reducing that mean time to detection and mean time to repair. Right, we want to help you detect by doing end-to-end testing, browser and API monitoring. We want to be able to communicate by sending you alerts, by creating automatic status pages for your users and for your team, and by giving you dashboards so you easily see the status, right? You saw me doing that here where I was able to go in and see very, very quickly what's failing, what's not, what's kind of working, right? And then when did it fail? When did it succeed? And then resolve, where we're able to do error tracing and distributed tracing to help give you some view into what's going on there, underpinned by a lot of really cool open source tools. Folks, that has been our time. Power sliding in at the exact right moment, 5 minutes before the end of the hour. But yes, if we have other questions, please do drop them into the chat or to the Q&A. We had some great questions come in. I'll be delivering via email. You'll get a recording of this session. And if it's okay with Javier, I'll probably CC everybody if they want to see this solution to trying to find, is this one of the values that's within an array?
I don't know. Maybe in the community, it's a good place to discuss it,
Oh,
so
yes, I'll
that
probably drop that in the Checkly Slack. So that's
yeah, so that emails are
checklyhq.com.
not CC'd, and yeah.
Yeah. So checkthehq.com/Slack. We'll drop that question in there as an answer. And I will certainly also turn it into a documentation page, because that's a good question. And it is not on, like, there's never a good OTTL like Substack yet. So we want to share it someplace.
Yep.
And then Maria just dropped in the chat if you want to. Oh, that's actually just to host some panelists, because you can't do a chat to everybody. But
Ah,
will be in the follow-up email that you'll all get. Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining. Thank you again to Maria for keeping us sane, and thank you so much to the people who answered in chat and who asked questions. Really, really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. It's really interesting to see the use cases that you all got out there, because we're seeing a lot of different things. But yeah,
Oh, and last one, more for people who are just starting out or adopt or partway through adoption. Our next webinar, date TBD, but you'll see an announcement of it certainly directly, because you registered for this, will be on auto instrumentation and those other kind of ramping up collecting data with OpenTelemetry webinar will be coming up next. Okay, folks, thanks
yes.
so much. Talk soon.
Bye bye. Have a good one.